I will now, that we are recording, call this meeting of the Planning Board of the Town of Wenham to order on Thursday, May 19th at 5:30 p.m. We are holding this meeting over Zoom because of the ongoing pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and the state's directives. The meeting is being recorded, and board members present are myself, Ann Weeks, Vice Chairman Dan Pasquarello, members David Anderson, Rick Woodland, and Peter Clay. Other members of the public are attending, and we have staff Margaret Hoffman and Catherine Tinsley with us. And we're so happy to welcome the consultants for our master plan update, Jen Golson and Laura Smead, am I pronouncing that correctly? To talk to us about kicking off the master planning process. As mentioned, I think the other night when we were trying to figure out how to organize ourselves, it's great that you were able to fit this hour in with us. Some of us have to drop at 6:30, others can stay on a little later. And I guess I will turn it to Margaret now to see if she has any further introductions, and then we'd just like to have a dialogue, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Ann. I'd like to introduce Jen Goldson and Laura Smead from JM Goldson. And Jen, I think we'll be able to start the conversation, and hopefully we'll have some good discussion tonight. Thank you.
I was unmuted for a second and then it got muted again for some reason.
I love technology.
I know. I'm really glad to be here though. And I was glad also that we could find a date so quickly to jump on this call. And I appreciate the hard stop. So, I'm happy to talk with you about whichever direction you'd like to go in. I did hear that you were questioning whether or not there should be a steering committee or an advisory group or some other group that you appoint, or if the planning board should really oversee this project more directly month to month. And so I would love to just hear a little bit more from your perspective about what you'd like, any questions you have for us. And Peter, Anne, do you mind if I kind of take over and call on people? I can defer to you, I'm sorry.
You do not need to defer to me. I don't have that kind of ego.
Okay, but I do see Peter's hand raised. I'm happy to take his questions.
I was one of the people who was really against having a steering committee, and based on an experience that I had yesterday, I'm convinced that we should have a steering committee.
You should. Oh, okay. So maybe we should all sign off then. No, I'm just kidding. Can you say what changed your mind?
Yes. We have a small sort of independent group, like 5 people, that are the Hamilton Wenham Climate Action Committee. And they presented at our select board meeting last night. And these guys really know their stuff about various aspects of climate change. And I think they would be really helpful because that is a big chunk of what we're doing. It's not a major chunk, but it's one of the pillars of what we're trying to create with a finished master plan.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it demonstrates one of the benefits of a steering committee or advisory group or whatever you choose to call it, that you can bring in different expertise as well as different viewpoints in the community to help the process. I'm happy to take Q&A. Laura and I have a few points about why we think a steering committee is beneficial, but if you all don't need us to go through them, let us know. We certainly want to make the best use of your time. I think I see Rick's hand raised.
Yeah.
I was just hoping maybe before we get into any detail, I haven't heard an overview. I'm a new member. Maybe you presented this before. Maybe an overview of how you see this rolling out. In your view, what maybe some best practices are, what you experience, or how we could help you in this process moving forward. at a high level, and then we can maybe drill down if people have specific questions. Does that make sense to the group?
I think that makes a ton of sense. And I should have prefaced this when I was introducing you and speaking to you, Jen, that we do have a new member. So a lot of us have been thinking about and talking about master plan for a while, kind of hoping to kick it off and like already feel like we have a foot in it. However, not everyone on the board is in the same place there. So it would be helpful if you would tee it up.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy. And let me just clarify. So this is not our official kickoff meeting. We're here because we know that you had some questions about how to start up and if you should have a steering committee or not. But when we meet with you at the official kickoff, you and I'm hoping a steering committee can meet jointly for the kickoff meeting. And we're holding June 9th right now. So if that date ends up working and the committee can be put in place before then, even if they're not, officially put in place, if you have the members identified, that would be helpful. And so our official kickoff will go through a whole presentation about how we approach master plans, what the schedule would be, what everybody's roles would be, and what to expect at each phase. But now we're meeting with you a little, I know this is a formal meeting, but Laura and I view this a little bit more informally. We're here to sort of help you get started and answer some questions. But I will give you an overview anyway. And so the way we like to approach a master plan is essentially in 4 phases. And each phase moves you into the next level. And so in the first phase, we look at existing conditions and just trying to understand what are the issues here, where have you come from recently, and where are you right now? We do that with a series of focus groups and interviews, in addition to working monthly with the steering committee or whatever you end up calling them. We do very engaging activities at each of those steering committee, I'll just call it steering committee for now, at each of those steering committee meetings where members of the public, if they are, in participating in the audience or observing, we encourage everyone to participate in those activities. And that really helps us understand, clarify project objectives and what they're really hoping for out of the project, what they see as the major concerns in the community. And Peter already offered one around climate change and the Climate Action Committee and the perspective that group can bring. Then we work on an activity around special assets and opportunities in the community, places that are especially valued. And we do a mapping exercise. And then we do an exercise at a third meeting around, and there's Laura's son. Then we do another meeting around concerns and issues in all of the elements of the master plan. And then we usually have a public forum at that point. And the public forum, is broadly advertised and would be at a location that you all feel is convenient for folks. And we typically structure that as an open house, and it's a chance to learn about the existing conditions. And then, so that's all in phase 1. And then we integrate focus groups and interviews throughout that process too. Then in phase 2, we're really talking about the vision and goals and trying to understand from community members, what in the next 10 years do you want to see Wenham working towards? And we structure lots of different activities at the community level at various events that are maybe already going on in the community that we can piggyback on digitally as well. And then going out to boards and commissions as well. And then in the third phase, we look at strategies and how do you achieve that vision, and looking at, what are best practices, but what are the financial constraints. We also have a component that's unique in this plan compared to the plans I've worked on. It's unique, where we have a fiscal impact component. That was something that the community thought was really important in the RFP. So you'll be meeting Dan Hodge at an upcoming meeting where he can talk in more depth about what he would look at and how that can play into looking at scenarios as we move along. And then in the final phase, it's shopping the plan around to various boards and commissions and getting additional feedback at that fourth phase as the plan is finalized. So I hope is that helpful in terms of just a quick overview?
It's very helpful. I wonder if you would talk about timing for the phases. They typically take a couple months apiece, or what?
Yeah, it depends. The first phase usually takes about 3 to 4 months. But they overlap as well. We really launch the second phase as we're wrapping up the first phase. And I have this all written out, so I'm going to just do it by memory. But the second phase is typically 4-ish months. Some of that, the reason I say ish is because sometimes if we are coming up against, the December holiday season or something, and we can't schedule meetings in the way we want, then sometimes we shift that to more like a 5-month schedule. So take these as, somewhat a little bit loose. The next phase, the strategies, we end up spending a little more time on. It can be upwards of, 5 to 6 months. It depends. We do department managers meeting. We do focus groups again. We have a consultant brainstorm time as well, where we look at best practices for you. And then we have a series of master plan committee meetings. And at the end of every phase, we also want to schedule a formal presentation to the planning board to give an update of exactly where we are in this moment. So you'll get a formal presentation at the end of each phase when we're presenting what we've learned from that phase and getting your feedback. And then the final phase is about 3 to 4 months, kind of pulling it all together. And again, those are and if you add it all up, it may or may not add up to 18 months because some of those are overlapping each other. I should have done the math really quick and figured out if that adds up to 18 months. But if it's not coming out to that, yeah, it's because there's a little bit of overlap. So I think you'll find, even though 18 months may sound very long, I don't know if it does to you, it actually goes very quickly because we have, we're very deliberate about this month, this is what we're focusing on, and you'll see a lot of progress throughout the course of that time.
Jen, it's been 60 years since our last one. I think we can,
So 18 months is okay.
18 months is like nothing.
Okay, good. I'd love to also just have Laura speak a little bit. We talked a little bit in that email we sent around the time commitment and the kind of activities we run with the focus group, but we would also, recommend a variety of viewpoints. As Peter already mentioned, the Climate Action Committee will be a really good viewpoint, but thinking strategically about what other town officials or board and committee representatives or other voices in the community that maybe aren't actively involved in town boards, but maybe there's younger voices in the community or other voices that aren't often involved in town things that you can tap into in the steering committee. And if you want to talk details of size and representation, I'm happy to do that. And then the role is really to advise you. That's the role of the steering committee, is to advise the planning board. The planning board is ultimately responsible for adopting the plan. Some communities decide to take the plan to town meeting, but it's actually not town meeting's role to approve the plan. Some communities just want a town meeting endorsement or something like that, which can be wise, but it's not part of the minimum requirements. And then Laura, do you have a few points you just want to mention? Laura just came to our team from the town of Canton as the planning director, but managed a number of processes, including a master plan.
Yeah, so I went through the master planning process both in Canton and as a steering committee member in my own town in Sharon. And I'll say, just from a practical standpoint, having a steering committee is really great for, also, you've heard about all of the different community outreach things that are involved in a master plan, and just logistically from having people able to kind of commit the time to the process and to the outreach, to going out into the community, to tabling at events, to meeting with other boards and committees, to having your own separate independent engagement meetings, all of your own individual connections that you have in the community it's a lot of work to take on as just the planning board. I think it's really helpful, not only for the inclusivity of the committee, but also just from a practical outreach and having more people there to do the work. And then also the other point I wanted to make is from again, sort of a practical consideration around implementation is the advisory committee eventually, after you want to make, of course, make sure your plan in the end is going to be implementable and practical. And the scope of the master plan, even though the planning board is the one who's responsible for adopting it and caring about it, there's aspects of the master plan that are beyond the responsibilities of the planning board. And you're going to need the buy-in from your leaders and from other boards and committees and town staff to really implement it. And having some of those people on your committee from the ground up, from the start, is really advantageous, and they can all weigh in from the beginning. It saves a lot of headaches later in the process.
Hey, Laura, I have a question. It's Peter Clay. When you were doing this in Canton, how involved were you in updating the select board?
So we had a select board.
And when did you do it?
Yeah.
How often?
So Dad is off getting Shaylin. Sorry.
I'm so grateful that mine are no longer Zoom bombing.
This is Corbin. He's 4. My other 10-year-old will be home soon with Dad. Yeah, the benefits and the cons of Zoom. Yeah, look, there's another person. There's 2 more over there. Anyway, where was I saying? So updating the select board. So we had a select board member on our committee, and that committee member both kind of updated the select board periodically as the kind of liaison from the master plan committee to the select board. But then similar to what Jen was mentioning about formal updates to the planning board and such, there was a presentation, I think maybe 2 to the select board, kind of one in the middle and one at the end to the select board as well. And then maybe slightly more frequent to the planning board, but maybe similar, something like 3. So the master plan group is really doing the heavy lifting, but you have representatives, ideally, in my mind, representatives from your town leadership on the steering committee or advisory committee, as well as, so that they can do this liaison role of updating the town leadership or updating the planning board or updating you're all kind of all involved together in this group, as well as perhaps some other outside voices who maybe aren't quite as integrated into the day-to-day of the town, but have that an interesting or important expertise or outside perspective.
So Anne, so having worked on major projects, a lot in a previous life, and Laura, just so you know, I am on the select board, and so is Gary Cheeseman, who's looking in, and we have ex-select board Catherine Harrison listening in. I don't want to create too much work for you, but whatever you present to us, the planning board, at the end of each phase, I think it would be a good idea to actually present that to the select board as well, just so that just so we have complete buy-in across the 4 phases, and we don't find out, oh, geez, because if a couple of select people don't really buy into all aspects, then it's going to be really hard to implement the plan.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to give you examples of 2 other models we've worked in other communities. So in Medway, we are presenting at the end of each phase to a joint meeting of the planning board, the master plan committee, and the select board. So it's 3 boards meeting at the end of each phase. In Winchester, the planning board, all of the planning board members were also on the steering committee. And there were other members who were part of the steering committee. So it was like I want to say about 17 people on that steering committee, but it included I'm pretty sure they have a 5-member planning board. And then at the end of each phase for that one, since the planning board was all on the steering committee and came to all the meetings, we only presented to the select board, but the master plan committee members were always there in the audience to help with the presentation. So there's lots of models, and I think we would go with whatever level of communication you feel is appropriate. And I agree about involving the select board and not, making sure no one feels like they're in the dark about anything.
Right. I was going to follow up on that question, or your response to that question with whether or not you could share more information on the range of the sizes of these advisory committees you've worked with and the composition.
Yes.
And I think Dan Pasquarello, sorry, I think before I go on mute, I think Dan had his hand up. Just yes.
I did. I was going to mention that we could schedule a joint meeting, but Jen covered that ground. So
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Duly noted.
Great. So I want Laura to chime in on this too, because her experience in Canton has been different from the ones that we have done. So the ones that we've done over the years have been larger committees. So I would say anywhere from 13 to 21 is the range that we've been directly involved with. I think Mansfield was the biggest one, and I think that was 21 people. I might have the numbers a little wrong. Maybe it was 23 or something, but it was 20 something, low 20s. And that was a great process because we ran every single meeting as a mini workshop. We really used the committee. We broke them up into groups. We did all sorts of activities with them. And then we involved any member of the public who happened to be there too. And we always gave homework so that people would come prepared. And for the most part, they did do the homework. And so that was a way to make the meetings very efficient as well. And that's how we ran it that way very deliberately because we knew this was a big committee and we really needed to manage them. But it was really helpful with outreach. And we did a big in-person open house. And it was really helpful with them being at all the different stations and really being a presence at that. And then in Winchester, it was a 17 I think if I'm remembering right, it was about 17 members. And then Medway is the same, although they just lost a member because someone, they had a baby and they couldn't continue. So now they're technically at 16, but 16 or 17 for Medway and Winchester. And that's been a nice size too. We've had select board, planning board, one representative from each of those boards. And then we have representatives from a variety of other boards as well as at-large members. And Laura, your experience in Canton was a much smaller committee, I think.
Yeah, it was. It was deliberately smaller. So I've been on the steering committee for Sharon, which was larger, and I echo Jen's pros. Definitely those are pros of being on a larger committee. One of the cons was at times it could be hard to get a quorum, actually, because you need a much higher number of people to be able to make the meeting time. And so scheduling and logistics can get challenging with a larger group. But the smaller group, it's really important to know that you're going to have people on there who are really committed to the process and are going to, show up and work. It's easier to get a quorum. But we had probably 5. So I was the staff on that project, but we had 5 members who were representatives from key committees. Sometimes we found people that could double dip, similar to you were saying you're on the planning board and select board. We had a member who was on both finance committee and economic development committee. So sometimes you can find people who serve in multiple committees and they can serve on the master plan committee as sort of a representative of a whole bunch of different boards and committees. And so that's sort of the approach we took in Canton. We only had 9, and we had 5 that were from other various boards and committees. And then we had 4 that were deliberately citizens at large and not involved with any other boards and committees, although some of them are now actually. But at the time they were new, and we actually put out a call to the larger community. We used social media and flyers and whatever to get the word out to solicit people who are interested in being involved in the committee, and we reviewed resumes and we interviewed people. And so we've selected, people who didn't have an axe to grind or a particular agenda in mind, just really wanted to participate in the future visioning and process of the community. And we found some really amazing, excellent people with really great skills that they could bring to the committee. So yeah, there's really no right or wrong size. And the firm and Jen and I have both worked with committees of all different shapes and sizes. So whatever you want to do, we can make work. But I think we both obviously are getting that we would recommend having an advisory committee.
And I think this committee would be appointed by the planning board, typically.
So I've seen it be appointed by the select board, but I've also seen it be appointed by the planning board. And so I think that's somewhat a local decision. I think it's more natural for the planning board to appoint, since it is a document that will have to be approved by the planning board. But I have seen other communities do a select board appointment. Laura, what did Canton do?
Well, Canton had so all boards and committees, unless specifically authorized by the select board, have to be nominated by the select board. But in Canton, there was actually a town meeting article when we set up for the funding for the whole thing that allowed the planning board to nominate four of the 9 seats. So I think it depends on the nuances of your community, but I would suspect that the select board would take the recommendations of who you would think would be appropriate for the committee, even if they had to be the rubber stamp or the people appointing authority. That's a question for, I guess, for you have members of the select board here, so they probably already know the answer to that question.
Does anyone else on the board have a question?
I was just going to say, we're kind of a simple town.
Yeah.
I mean, compared to Winchester, Canton, Sharon. So, I mean, given that we're pretty simple, I mean, we have like no commercial base whatsoever. In your view, Jen and Laura, would that suggest a smaller committee?
I guess I would back out what representation would be useful to you, and then I would decide, because if you're thinking of, if you do like the idea of a few at-large members, and you like that idea of putting the call out for volunteers, that you would review, obviously, so you get some diverse perspectives on the committee. And then I would list out what boards or committees do you want representation from. Some people may represent multiple boards, and you can, use one person to represent CPC and planning board and whatever. So I don't want to answer that question without knowing what are the boards and committees and how many at large. I'm not trying to evade it. I just feel like I'm not sure what the answer is.
So one of the great things about Wenham is how beautiful this town is. And it really is about open spaces. The good news is Ann Weeks is on the open space committee. So we got to get a twofer in there.
Right.
And you're on the board of selectmen.
I have a question.
Mr. Cascarello.
So I want to hear a little bit more about what the role of the steering committee is with respect to reporting back to the planning board, and what exactly they're doing and what we're doing in this process.
Sure. So I'm happy to report. So I would say every time do you meet once a month typically? The planning board? Yeah. Yes. So I would say on every agenda, you would have a master plan update line item that whoever is representing your board on the steering committee, and I would say at least 2 of you should represent this board on that steering committee. I mean, you could follow the Winchester model of you all being on that steering committee, but at a minimum, I would say 2 of you should represent. And those 2 people would be responsible every month to report back to the planning board. And, there may be questions they want to ask, or maybe there are draft documents you want to share with the planning board and review. Maybe it's helping get the word out about an upcoming forum. So whatever that update is for that month, it could be different, but I would say you'd always every month have a line item on your agenda update about the master plan. And then I would say the role of the the role of the planning board ultimately will be to approve the plan. So at each of the project phases, closeout presentations, if it's joint with the select board, either way, or if it's just you would be commenting on where we are. We'll say, this is what we've done. This is what we've heard. We've submitted every phase we have a major deliverable for you to review. And so you'll get the deliverable in your packet. Before your meeting, you would review it, give us comments, give us direction, and then we'd revise based on that.
The planning board would get the deliverable, or the steering committee would get
No, well, the steering committee will already have helped us
Got it.
create
Okay.
the deliverable, and then we submit it to the planning board and the select board. If they're doing a joint meeting, we just put it in your packet before the presentation. We present what we've learned and what we've come up with, and then you give us your comments and we revise based on, you know, the comments that you give us. And that helps set the direction for the next phase, because we're gathering your official comments at that point. At the steering committee meetings, we'll have activities, specific activities that we've already, you know, designed, and we send it out in advance. People do their homework, and I'll give you an example. So the one we just ran in Braintree a couple weeks ago, we gave them a week in advance. We gave them a worksheet that said, identify your concerns and issues in each of the CPA categories. In each of the master plan categories. I want to know if you can identify 3 top concerns. What are your primary concerns regarding transportation, regarding open space, regarding housing, regarding economic development, et cetera? And they do that, they come prepared to the meeting, and then we run an exercise where we discuss what they came up with, and we see if there are similarities and themes, and we involve members of the public who are, you know, in attendance at the meeting and the discussion as well. So that's an example of the kind of work. And then we take that and we create a summary of what we learned, and we integrate that when we're designing the public forum, for example. We already know what kind of issues we want to bring up in our presentation because the steering committee has helped us craft those. So that's an example, but I mean, I hope that's helpful. The steering committee will get all of our working documents, all of our outlines, all of our drafts, all of our summaries of what we learned. And then we put it into an end of phase deliverable that says, here's everything we've learned. Here's where we think it's pointing us. Planning board, what do you think of this? And select board, what do you think of this? Give us feedback at the end of each phase. Does that help to clarify?
Yes, it does. So just so you know, when did we discuss this last year, Margaret? I think it was
we did in August and September. It's in the minutes. And I think at that point I was the sole flag waver for the steering committee. So it went down in flames at that point, but here we are again.
Right. So I think our concerns at that point were really about efficiency and moving this forward because it's been so bogged down. I mean, I think we are years into this process at this point. So I am, you know, in favor of whatever is going to make this more efficient. I do still have concerns about a steering committee that is too large. A steering committee that's going to be dominated by particular special interests. I think we should be aware of, you know, sometimes we hear the same voices over and over again in town politics. Or not politics, just town involvement. So I think we need to discuss all of those things. It's in terms of if we're going to have a committee, how big it should be and how we do it. And one other question. As far as the members from the planning board being on the committee, I don't think we can have more than 2 because then if we have 3, we have a quorum and we actually have a planning board meeting. So have you ever, can we rotate through this steering committee to sort of maximize our involvement, or have you?
So I'll answer in 2 ways. So the first answer is you can have them all on if you advertise it as a planning board meeting too, every single time the master, and that's what Winchester did. They always advertised both. This is a planning board meeting and a master plan committee meeting, and they opened the meeting with both groups voting on that. But in terms of revolving, I would advise you not to do that because this steering committee will, the consistency of the steering committee will actually make our work more efficient for you. If we have members revolving in and out, it's going to become less efficient for us. Members will have potentially completely different viewpoints. They won't necessarily have known all of the details of the work that we did in the prior months. And so I would say that 2 members max, if you don't want, and it would be the same, you know, hopefully the same members. I get that your terms may be up and you may not be reelected, and that happens. But I would advise, for sake of efficiency, to have a consistent membership. Laura, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that too.
I mean, Not really. I see the pros and cons of both. I rather liked the logistical simplicity of having a smaller, more streamlined committee that may work better for a smaller town, but also, you know, it's a lot of work. So you just have to think through on your planning board. I wouldn't, you know, I still think you should have a steering committee, but think through who do you want all the members of the planning board to be on it, plus some more folks from other committees, for example, maybe a couple citizens at large, or do you want to have just a couple, you know, to have a purposely smaller committee with 8 or 9 members and just a couple from the planning board who will, you know, be liaisons to the larger group.
And just to clarify, the rotation point I was raising, I was only applying that to planning board. I wouldn't rotate anybody else. That's
right. I think, Rick, did you have your hand up earlier? Do you have a question?
I do. I'm all for efficiency, but I know we've taken a long time to get to this point. But this is like, the analogy I use is that when in my business, you spend so much money on what's inside the house that when you get to the finishes, which everybody's going to see, you're cheaping out because you have no money left. So to me, I'd rather be a larger group with more involvement. And if it's more than 18 months, it is, so that we can get the best work product we can get, so that we're not saying, we should have done that. We should have done that to the best of our ability. So that's just my comment on efficiency and size of the group.
I'd like to ask staff how long it would take us to go through the process of identifying people for a steering committee and getting that through the select board.
Yeah, so we've had a couple of discussions about this already. There are certain components to the master plan. Jen, if maybe you can help me out, but there's housing, there's open space is one of them, there's transportation. So some of those have specific committees already in town. We have the Affordable Housing Trust, you know, Council on Aging, Recreation, open space committees. We had talked about maybe getting a member of each of those committees, especially the ones that are pertinent to the master plan itself, at the least to have a member from those committees. I had a discussion today with Gary Cheeseman that it might not be a bad idea to just ask the chairman of each of those committees if they could participate. The chairman of those committees certainly have the knowledge and you know, some of the history. Most of them have been on it for quite a while. So I think if we chose the committees that we want to get representation from and reach out to them, we can do it this week. Well, today's Thursday, but next week, and say to them, you know, even say, you know, being a responsible chairperson of your committee, we would like you to be a part of this master plan steering committee. And I think that would take us, you know, just a week to get everybody to okay it. And then the select board's next meeting, I know they're at least meeting June 7th. So on June 7th, we could have that list of people.
How about identifying people from the community who want to be involved? Yeah. If, you know, I heard, I forget whether it was Jen or Laura say, you know, casting a net and trying to get, and certainly that goes to Dan's point about wanting to hear new voices.
Yeah, well, for sure. And we have Joanne Frischella. She's expressed interest all along. And we do have some people that have expressed interest when we first put the word out. And we can do that too. We could certainly send something out on our social media, or
do you have a list of those names from however many years ago it was when we first started talking about this?
I do. Yeah.
Could I just make a suggestion? So if you don't mind, one community we worked with, it was Mansfield. They decided to have some at-large members, and they really wanted, like Laura, it was Laura who said you could cast a wide net and put a call for interest out. Canton did that. But what Mansfield did is they did the same thing, but at their first kickoff meeting when we presented, which would be June 9th, according to what we were hoping for, you could basically have it in your newspaper, sometime between now and the next few weeks, and say, we're looking for people who are interested. Come to this meeting if you think you want to find out more about it. And then after the meeting, let us know if you think you're going to be interested. And then you choose them after that. So they don't all have to be in place for June 9th. You could start up and then add the at-large later. So just
so you know, we don't have a newspaper. There's no town newspaper.
Oh, sorry. I should have remembered that.
Not even any Hamilton Wenham newspaper anymore.
Oh, you're kidding. There's nothing anymore?
No, we'd have to go to the Salem Evening
Salem News, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know if anyone in Wenham even gets that. But
well, on social media or whatever way you typically, the point really is more that you don't have to have them in place before we can have a kickoff meeting.
Right. Peter Clay has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Dan's point, which is, the possibility of having people try and dominate the discussion. And I was just curious, maybe at the end of each phase, do you guys do some kind of like opinion as to whether the steering committee is working well or not? And if it's not, what needs to change?
We've never done that. We've never had a problem with any steering committee.
Well, that's great.
The only thing I will say, and I won't say what community, but we've had occasionally we'll have a member who dominates, as I think Dan or Dave, I forget who, was saying. And what we've, the way we structure the meetings, because we ask people to do homework and, and share the kind of this discussion, we level the playing field that way. People actually submit their work to us, so it kind of dilutes any dominating. We try our best not to let certain members dominate a group. But the other thing I would say is that the one time this did happen, we did have to have the select board, a member of the select board, talk to this particular member behind the scenes and just say, look, we're hearing you. You keep mentioning the same thing over. We've integrated this. These are all the other things you should know that's going on behind the scenes related to this particular thing. And it would be more constructive if you could, maybe bring up other topics beside this one thing. And so we've had to do that just one time in my memory of the years that we've been doing this.
So, but you do have experience as a referee, which is good.
Yeah, we facilitate pretty tightly, actually.
Okay. Go ahead, Peter, and then David has his hand up.
I was going to make a silly joke that I'd nominate Dan to be our hitman.
I'm going to ask David Anderson what his question is.
I'm not sure what that meant, but Dave, you're muted.
I think it's a lawyer joke. There's three of us.
All right, fair enough.
Lawyers.
So I want to take a step back, and hopefully I'm not overly belaboring this. From a planning board perspective, what this means to me, this plan, is that when we have a difficult application come before us, and we have to make a difficult decision, we can rely on something that the community has given us to guide our decision. And I'm newer to this town. I'm barely cracking 3 years. I'm not. But I've participated in some things in this town. And my concern is that you get a lot of the same voices who serve on a lot of the boards, and you get at public hearings not a lot of people that show up. And obviously, and I don't think anyone's saying it will be, if that were the outcome of this process, the document that we get, though it could be awesome and sophisticated and perfect for this town, I wouldn't have any sense that when we make that tough decision as a planning board, be it on a new commercial district, application, permit application, or some type of lot split in a certain part of town, that we could say to the person we're not just doing this, the 5 of us, we're doing this based on the community sense as reflected in the master plan. So in a way, I feel like we're asking the wrong question. I don't mean that in a dismissive way. We're asking the right questions in this meeting. Jen, I loved your proposal because what it reflected to me is a genuine sense that you want to engage the community at large. That's what matters to me, is that, you know, I don't know if this is pie in the sky, but to have a 90% response rate to something that, you know, survey that we do. I mean, would that be unheard of? Would that be unprecedented? Probably. But that's what matters to me. That's the kind of outcome that means that we've been inclusive and brought in community input. You know, having a 23-member steering committee of the people that we can all rattle off right now because we know who these people are. They're on the boards and we see them all the time. They come in with specific perspectives, you know, and whether the select board chooses it or we choose it or whatever, to have those same people at the table who are very experienced and who do know this town very well and are great professionals. But we, you know, 1, it's the same voices. 2, it subjects this process to a more politicalization, which is something that we are a simple town, Peter, but we've had a lot of politicalization in the dialogue recently. And I don't want this process to be infected by that. Maybe it can't not be, but I don't want to invite that. So that's my concern. Now, you know, what I liked you said, Jen, and Laura too, is it almost sounds like a permanent focus group. It's people who've committed to showing up on a repeat basis, who are stakeholders in the town, to participate and give feedback to advance the process. I love that conceptually, but only if we also have the ability to maximize input from the community at large, because that's what's going to bind the community to this document, not something that's just presented, whether it's presented or not town meeting. I'm amenable to both ways, and I'll just end with this. And the other thing that I'm not confused about, but I'll just throw out there, is having served recently on a 7-person plus ex officio committee, as well as this, when you have a 3-member committee, I realize that that's a big quorum, 12 people, but the open meeting law, I think, still presents concerns. And so if you have 2 people at a barbecue talking about, that are on the subcommittee, that are talking about the work, that begins to present some problems. And I don't know if that's been confronted before, but I'm curious if it does. End of soapbox rant.
I was just add one thing on to your statement, which I thought was good, David, and that is, I think maybe in a way you're arguing that if we have a steering committee, it needs not to be town insiders and the planning board. It needs to be a couple of folks from key committees and a larger number of at-large folk who have indicated interest and have talent in the area. Like, you're right that Joanne has expressed interest, and she has, you know, credentials as a planner, has been through this process before. That's the kind of help that I think would be really valuable. And it's somebody who's coming in as a resident, showing an interest in this process for the sake of this process. So anyway, just to add on to what you were saying.
Yeah, that was kind of the mentality in Canton, how they decided to go about it. And they deliberately had almost half of the committee be citizens at large because they really wanted to seek the outside viewpoints, thinking of the plan as being really, you know, for the next 10 years, 10, 15 years, and wanting to hear. I mean, Dave, you might be new to the town now, but you won't be in 10 or 15 years, right? So, but yeah, so it's this, again, there's sort of really no right or wrong way to do it. And you all are going to know what makes sense and what's going to be practical for Wenham to do. Yeah, just, you know, let us know.
I wonder if it's your view that we need to take a vote on this tonight, Margaret.
Well, I don't know that it requires an official vote or anything. I think it's just something the board should decide. We can put out a call for participation right away. We can start to get that word out, so that if you want to get more at-large members, we can, I guess the board could take a vote and you could say, we'd like to see a steering committee formed of a certain amount of people. We can request members of certain committees and then a number of at-large too. I think it's just the board, I guess, should decide, what do you want to do? Do you want to have a steering committee? It sounds like we think that's going to be the best way for the board to move forward.
Can I suggest that it sounds like we have some differing opinions still among the board, and that we should probably have some deliberation here. I know Rick, I saw Rick's hand up a minute ago. I know he wants to say something. And if we're treating this like a regular meeting, if we've had the presentation, I don't know if Jen or Laura have more to present, but it sounds like they've given us the overview and a lot of details.
Yeah, right.
So I would suggest that, unless anybody from the public wants to weigh in, that we talk amongst ourselves about, one, do we want to have a committee? Two, if we do, what's the size of it? And then what's the composition? And take it from there.
Right. And I will reiterate that I have a hard stop at this point. I can stay on till 6:35, but I have to be in another town at 7. So, okay. Rick, you had your hand up, and then I can entertain a motion.
I had a couple of questions, procedural questions that I didn't understand before I could have an opinion on the steering committee. The first one I had was, if it's only 2 planning board members and 1 select board member, et cetera, we're not going to violate any open meeting laws, so a quorum wouldn't be needed. I guess I don't understand how that works.
I think anytime there's an official committee, and this would be an official committee,
thank you,
presided over by a chair with the blessing of the select board, the electeds, then the open meeting law applies.
So the next question is it written somewhere that the select board has to be the authority? I mean, can we do all this on our own? I just don't know if we want to bring another level of complexity. We have a representative from the select board here, so we probably should be able to get their views and issues on the table. Do these candidates need to be approved by the select board officially, or do we just say, these are the people?
Margaret, that's a question for you. Yeah. I don't know
I'm not sure. I mean, typically in Wenham, the select board appoints all of the committees. I don't know that we have official language that requires that they do that, but I'll find that out as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess the question there, Margaret, would it be, would that apply to a committee that is created to advise us?
Right, which
it's an ad hoc committee. Yeah. It's an ad hoc committee. It's not a permanent committee. So I don't know if that changes the level of involvement they must have.
Okay. Yep, I'll find out.
Because we created a committee inside of the Affordable Housing Trust that worked on a project with an outside consultant, and that committee met regularly in quorum without, that was just approved by the Affordable Housing Trust. So yeah, I don't know if that's different. Oh, we broke the law.
Never.
Okay, I'll find out for sure. I'll try to find out tomorrow if I can.
Well, does that mean we are not in a position to take a motion or have a vote this evening?
So can't we vote to say, yeah, we want a steering committee?
It would be helpful if we could at least get some guidance on how to proceed. Should we start to reach out to the community from people to join a steering committee? Should I start to reach out to other boards and committees and see if they could have liaisons?
I would entertain a motion, Peter, if you want to put a motion on the floor, and if people are ready to vote on it.
So okay.
Peter, can we release our guests first? That way they can have the rest of their night.
Unless they want to watch.
Peter, before you put a motion on the floor, we're going to lose Ann in about 3 minutes. So, Ann, I think it would be helpful if you weighed in on the question of, do you want to have a committee first? I don't think we're going to be able to.
I wanted to have a committee from the get-go.
Okay. So what I was going to
I
say
was
is
the lone voice.
I don't think we're going to be able to get to a decision on the size of a committee if we vote to have one tonight, but we could probably at least decide whether we're going to have a committee or not. That's my comment.
I think we should decide that we're going to have a committee.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion,
Thank
Chairman.
you.
I'd like to make a motion that we do create a steering committee for the, or a advisory committee, let's use that term, advisory committee to the planning board, who would work with our outside consultant to help develop the master plan under the guidance of the planning board.
Peter Clay seconds.
All in favor, I'll take a vote on that unless there's any amendment. No, Weeks says aye.
Clay says aye.
Pascarello,
Pascarello says aye.
Anderson,
Anderson says no.
Woodland.
Yes.
All right, there you have it. So, Margaret, we're going to ask you to look into the specific questions posed about who would have to appoint such a board. And
So,
when we meet on the 9th, can we discuss the composition?
Jen, how do you feel about that? Is that too late?
So if you didn't get to a point where we could have the steering committee, or at least a good solid portion, even if you're still looking for at large, on the 9th at the kickoff, then I would say we would hold off the kickoff till the following month or whenever you are able, because what we'd like to, we don't want to do the kickoff with the detailed presentation and the activity that we have planned without the steering committee members. We don't want to, jump ahead without them involved, even if they're not officially sworn in or anything. To have them at that meeting would be really important. So we would just suggest we push the kickoff meeting maybe to July, which maybe is not a great month to do it, but yeah, that's what I would say.
We also had discussed at our last meeting the need perhaps to meet more frequently if we're coming into this process in order to make room for you. So I don't know, I mean, with the Memorial Day weekend, I don't know that that's going to be a possibility or not, but I wonder if there's some way we could continue the conversation with the full board before your kickoff. Margaret, what does the 9th look like? Is it a full agenda?
Not so far, no.
Okay, that's good.
There's
Can
just,
I
well,
recommend that-
Okay.
Sorry, Margaret, can I recommend that we schedule a special meeting, that this is the only item, and if it goes by Zoom,
Yes.
we can probably get this done in a half an hour or so.
Yes.
But I share
that.
some of Dave's concerns about composition, and I think we need to hash some things out.
Yes.
Okay.
I think this 5:30 time is really helpful. And I don't know that we necessarily need to ask Jen and Laura to sit in on the meeting.
No. What could we meet next week, do you think? Maybe Wednesday night, which is the 25th?
I'm in.
Yes.
I think so. Let me look at my calendar.
I can't meet on the 25th.
No. The 26th, I have ZBA, but they're not until 7. If you want to do next Thursday, the 26th at 5:30 to discuss this, we could do it then. And then
that's fine with me.
If you all could decide on the makeup of the committee, a number of members who you would like to invite, I'll get started right away on doing outreach and something out on the website. We can put it on Wonderful World of Wenham. I know people who are on that could just say the planning board is looking for people who are interested in being on the committee to advise on the master plan.
We also prefer it if you're wonderful. So
you have
So
to be
5:30.
Fabulous, not just wonderful, fabulous.
So do you want to shoot for next Thursday?
Knocks me out.
5:30? Can everyone do that?
Next Thursday at 5:30. Going once, going twice.
Okay, great.
All right. Can I
All right,
take a motion to adjourn this meeting until we meet again at our next meeting on Thursday, May 26th at 5:30?
Peter Clay seconds.
Peter Clay has to move before he seconds.
Can you move it and someone else will second?
Oh, sorry.
Peter
I think
Clay.
Peter moved. I'll second.
Okay. Weeks says aye. Pasquarello.
Aye.
Clay.
Aye.
Anderson.
Aye.
Woodland.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. And thank you so much to our consultants. You guys have been wonderful tonight. Appreciate the time. And
you.
members of the public for listening in.